All right, guys, in today's video, what we're going to be working on is this 6.5 liter diesel on this 99 Chevrolet Suburban is going to get new mechanical fuel injectors and return lines installed. So that's going to be our job today. I'm going to take you through doing that on both the driver and the passenger side, show you what you have to clear out of the way to make room for that. Before we get started, let's go ahead and take a look at the service manual and see what it outlines for this procedure. All right, so we're looking at a 99 CK truck, so we're going to check that service manual for this. I'm going to turn over the section on replacing the injection nozzles. Now, there's really not much to what they have to say here, right? Disconnect the battery neg, remove the fuel line clip, remove the fuel return hoses from the nozzle. So they're showing those a plug in here and here. Remove the fuel injection line, get it out of the way, cap off the nozzle and the lines. These mechanical injectors are super sensitive to debris. So you get debris in there, you'll end up doing the job again. There's a special socket that's going to be needed for this. This is the GM version, the J29873. I'm going to be using an aftermarket version, but there's several different companies that make this. I'll put that in the description of the video. And that's it. You take it out. And then, of course, there's an installation procedure where all this gets reversed. Key points on this is about using anti-seize. This is one of the few times where GM does recommend anti-seize, and then the 50 foot-pound torque when we get these reinstalled. So there's not much to this, and it really oversimplifies the procedure. When you see what we have to go through here, there's a lot more than what we have here. Another thing that's worth highlighting in this other GM manual, so this is just a GM training manual on this particular engine. If we come in here, we can see a good view of what we're after. Driver's side is going to be cylinders 1, 3, 5, and 7, the odd cylinders. Passenger side is going to be 2, 4, 6, and 8. These are the lines, the hard lines coming out of the injection pump and going over to each of those injectors. We're going to need to get them disconnected at the injectors. We're going to need to get them disconnected at these retaining points, and then we're going to need to get them disconnected at the injection pump itself. We do not want to bend these lines, so we're going to have to get these lines out of the way to remove the injectors. This is an interesting picture here, too, that talks about what the structure of these Bosch mechanical injectors are. You can see all the different pieces stacked up here. These can be rebuilt with the wear items replaced. We're not going to be using rebuilds or rebuilding the old ones here. We're just going to put some new old stock GM ones on here from AC Delco. You'll see that when we get to that point. The part number is actually given for the anti-seize compound. This is a nickel-based compound, not a copper-based compound. The copper-based compound GM would use on something like an oxygen sensor, but for something like this application, it'll be a nickel-based. This is a discontinued number, but I'll show you the current number when we get to that point. All right, so let's get started. There's not much of the disassembly covered in the manual, unfortunately, so we're just going to have to go through it as we go. All right, we're going to start with disconnecting the negative terminal on both batteries, right? Since the diesel engine, we've got two, so we'll do the one over here on the driver's first. Now we're going to move over to the passenger side. All right, so we got the driver's side battery disconnected, right? You can still see our hood lights functional, right? So the test to make sure you've got this de-energized, and I'm going to make sure you also take this negative terminal off the battery over on this side. And now the hood light's out, so now we know we've got everything de-energized. All right, next thing we're going to do is we're going to pull this engine cover off. There's 4 10mm bolts securing that. We're going to pull those, and then it just lifts right off. The bolts are captive, so they'll stay with the cover. All right, get those guys loosened up. Might be a couple of threads still holding over here. Now we can get the cover out of the way. All right, next up is this upper intake manifold crossover. So we've got a couple of sensor connectors to gently work off. This one, and you guys can't see it, but I'll show it to you when I get it off. This one here, okay? Then we've got these 6 10mm bolts that we've got to pull out. We've got these two 13s, because this brace that secures these two pieces together, we've got to get this to let go so we can remove this. And then we've got this 8mm on this clamp. So let's go after these two guys next. Let's switch out our socket for a 13 and an 8. So we'll do this 8 first. Just want to get this guy so he's loose. All right. Now we're going to need our 13. All right, so this guy here. This guy here we're just going to loosen. So we can do that. And we'll put this here so we don't lose it. So there's an RTV sealant between this tube and this aluminum crossover. Normally you got to break that seal with like a radiator hose type of tool like this. As long as this clamp is loose like this, the only thing holding it is going to be the RTV sealant. You can use a tool like this to break that seal. But there's wasn't expecting this to be holding on at all. There's probably just one spot somewhere. Yeah, there it is. I just heard something pop loose. That was probably it right there. This is what you have to do to get her to come off. Let's see if we got it where she'll twist now. Oh, she's still bound up on something. I've got our clamp is completely loose, so that's not anything that's holding us on. There we go. Looks like right there had some re-adhesion right there on the top edge. All right, once you get the RTV to let go, this comes out. As you see, there's a gasket in here as well, so take note of that. The first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to cover this up so we don't get any debris that falls inside there. All right, let's get this gasket off of here. We've plugged up the turbo outlet here, and so the next thing we got to do is we got to get the lower intake manifold off next. So here's the injection pump right here, and then our lines to the fuel injectors. You guys can see them down here, referencing that picture, right? You can just barely see them right down there, right? You can't get access to them without removing this guy. So the next thing we're going to do is we've got some debris here. Looks like we've had some kind of rodents chilling out in the back here. I see a couple of crunched up seeds. We need to get in here and blow all of this out so that when we pull this manifold, this crap doesn't fall down into the engine. So we're going to get some a hose over here, some compressed air. We're going to blow all this out, and while we're at it, we'll go ahead and blow out all 8 injector areas just in case there's some dirt sitting around there as well. So let me go do that, and then once we blow it out, then we're just going to start taking stuff out of the way. Now we're going to leave the AC here. We're not going to have to touch the cooling line. I mean, this radiator hose is kind of in the way, but we're just going to work with it because we don't want to disassemble too much here. I think we'll be fine with these cooling lines over here. I mean, they're not ideal, but we'll just try to work with that as well. So what we'll do is we'll disconnect the fuel filter manager from those two 15s in the back, and then we'll just work our way up both sides with the 15 millimeters that are holding this guy to the block. All right, so in order to see what we have to blow out of the way and get the most clearance, we had to kind of take the top cover off. So we're going to use a couple of really heavy pieces of wood and a paper towel to make sure now this crap gets blown back into the intake. Now we're just going to go do that cleaning step I mentioned. Once we do that cleaning step, then we'll be able to start disassembling this upper piece. So I'm just going to keep cleaning all this out. I'm going to have to get in front of the camera to get some of this really well, but you guys get the idea. We're just going to try to blow all the debris out of this valley where we're going to end up pulling this intake out of. All right, next book. We've got all that blown out. This is what we already did, the upper intake manifold. The only reason I'm showing this again is you may have a non-turbocharged engine, and you're still going to have the fuel injectors, but you're going to have this EGR valve. So just pointing out that's another piece that's on there that stays on. You're just going to remove it the same way that we just showed, but it's going to look a little different. So that's one thing I wanted to show. Something else I wanted to show is on the lower. On the lower, they got a procedure here where they talk about what they want you to do, starting with removing the upper. They want you to take the fuel filter off first, and then the glow plug relay. Then they want you, if you have the non-turbo, they want you to take the EGR boost solenoid bracket off. Then they want you to remove the heater hose and bracket from the cylinder head. Now, I'm going to try and skip that step. We'll see how that goes, just so we don't want to mess around with it. Remove the heater hose and bracket if it has rear heats. This Suburban has that. But again, I'm going to see if I can skip removing the hose. I'm just going to pull the bracket. We'll see if we can get this to fold out of the way. There's some ground straps in several places. These are the ones in the lower, in the rear, when you're facing the front of the vehicle, passenger side. Now, you got to be careful in these, especially with corrosion. You can't use power tools, because what will happen is these nuts will often grab these wires and spin the whole stud out, and then you'll rip the wires. What you have to do in these kind of situations is you're going to have to get a wrench to hold the stud while you take the nut off separately. So just watch out for that. The only ones you can power out are the ones that don't have any kind of wires attached to them. This is just straight up taking the bolts off. The only other thing that's worth showing here is I like this diagram here where they number these. In fact, you got to come up with some way to organize these. They're different lengths. Some are studs with nuts, some are straight up bolts, some are studs without nuts. I use a bunch of Ziploc bags, and I number them this way, and this way we can make sure each bolt goes back the way the factory intended it. All right, guys, a topside creeper is going to be real handy for this job. If not, your back's going to be in for a treat. I'm going to go ahead and not narrate as we pull these. I'm going to pull them in the order that we saw them numbered in the service manual, and I'll show you different tools as we go. Just take note of the tools I'm using to get each one. Because we've left this radiator hose in, we're going to have some clearance problems. So we're going to use some 3/8 hardware, and other places we'll use 1/2-inch hardware. The other thing I got here, tennis ball on the hood latch, real handy. Ask me why I know. But, you know, past experience, you jump up on these things, it can help prevent you from getting your scalp hit. All right, so we're going to dive into it. We're going to do the driver's side first, all the way back, and then we're going to come down the passenger side. All right, at this point we've got all the bolts out that are holding the lower intake. Now we've got some brackets like this one, the one on the other side, this vacuum line to the wastegate solenoid. We got to get some of this stuff out of the way. These ground lines, this was, I disconnected this early on when we weren't narrating. This is the remote PMD harness. Got to get that out of the way. We want to clear all these connections that are going to need to be unplugged in order to lift this out. And we're going to get the fuel filter manager tucked back out of the way as well. So I'm going to spend some time to kind of get all this stuff out of the way, and then we'll get a pry bar and we'll start to lift this intake out. All right, so what we've done is we've taken, we can get this stuff out of the way now because we're about to pull this off. Couldn't get a bungee in here, but we just took some string to keep all of these wiring harnesses kind of grouped up like this. One gotcha you got to watch out for is right down here. This particular bolt, there's a tab. If we zoom in, this tab is holding the hard line for the fuel return. So it's not going to rotate or anything. We're going to have to slide the intake back out of it without bending it up, right? So that's something to keep in mind. In the side here, we've got this glow plug wire harness that's running. We've kind of positioned it up out of the way so we can kind of scoot the intake up out this way. And we've got the fuel filter manager pushed off of these two bosses. That should allow it to clear that. You don't really have anything to worry about on this side. So I'm going to go around now, and I'm just going to get a pry bar, and we're going to try to break the adhesion. I'll start on the driver's side here. There's a couple of places where you can fit one in. If you see right like that. Right? So we're just trying to kind of make sure she's going to let go like that. That's also given us a reassurance that we did get all the fasteners out of the way. Now, one thing I'm noticing as we do this side here, we've got this gasket in the way. We got to get it to kind of separate like that and keep the gasket down so it doesn't pull up against these lines. And just a little bit of a twist with the pry bar and we can take care of that. All right. I'm going to do the same thing on the other side, and then we're going to position the camera and we'll lift it off. All right, we cleared that little return hose brace in the front. We've cleared the fuel filter manager. And we're working on this glow plug harness and this big harness in the back. It'll be fun getting this back in here, I tell you. We're stuck on something. It's not a fastener. It's not a wiring harness. I'm guessing it's this bundle of harness in the back here. It's got to be this stuff. Yeah, this is it. I don't know if we're going to be able to film all this, folks, because I need to get back there and see a little better what's blocking this. I can can only feel so much. Yep, no, I'm going to have to get right here. You guys aren't going to be able to watch this part. We're going to get this cleared of whatever it's binding up on here, and that should allow us to get it out. All right, there's no way around it. I really didn't want to deal with coolant on this job, but we're going to have to get this upper radiator hose out of the way. We just don't have the clearance to get the manifold out with this in place. That should be enough to get it past. And then we'll go ahead and get the tool we used before. Now I got to worry about coolant running into this intake because of this. Go ahead and break the seal. Oops. Yep. Move this into a different position. Let's see. So we're probably going to have the coolant from the thermostat. There shouldn't be anything actually in the hose. There might be. But before I pull this, I looked at it very carefully, and at least on the Suburban, we just don't have any clearance to go back any further with this huge bundle of wiring harnesses that are back here. We just can't push this any further back to get this thing to come up. And even if we could, we were trying to avoid pulling all these coolant hoses off, and we can't. If we're going to end up pulling that, we're going to have a coolant problem anyway. So if I can just get this out of the way, then we might be able to clear it up here in the front. That's the thought. All right, guys, I'm just slowly trying to work the coolant that's inside this housing into these rags. Really don't feel like draining the whole thing, right? Just for this one little problem. You guys can see it glugging out over here, hopefully. Right there. So just going to do a little bit of that, change the rag, do a little bit more, and then we'll be able to pull this hose off. All right, we got bored of this and just drained the coolant from below. So we're probably going to have a little bit left in the hose here that we just don't want to run down. We have some rags here to catch that. I'm going to get this hose up and out of the way, and we'll see if this got us the clearance we need to get this intake out of here. All right, that did help us get this out of the front now. Kind of hitting the air conditioning sensor now here. This Suburban just has so much stuff packed in here. Guys, I might have to take the air conditioning compressor off. That looks like that's going to be necessary as well. We just can't clear this guy with that in the way. Unfortunately, there's no way out of it. We need to clear between this pressure switch and this line. I was thinking maybe I could shift it a little bit to this side and go under it. Let's try that first. Run this glow plug harness underneath. Get it out of the picture. Maybe clear these coolant lines. Nope, we're going to have to take the air conditioning compressor off. Jesus. All right, let's get looks like a 13. We'll have to pull these 4 bolts so that we can lift this up enough to get this out of here. All right, guys, to get the belt off the AC compressor, just mirror here, I'll show you on the belt tensioner. There's a little 3/8" socket piece, or drive piece rather, molded into this belt tensioner. We're going to put our breaker bar in there, and we're going to push down on it to get this to release so that we don't damage the resonator. We'll come at it from this side. We'll push down on it with our left hand, and we'll reach over here with our right hand and work it off of the, whoops, bumps you guys, work it off of the alternator. I'm going to have to block your view for just a moment here. Come on. There we go. All right, and slowly let that tension back up, and then we'll be able to get it off the AC compressor. This is a pisser because we just changed this compressor a little while ago. Now we're taking it back off again. We will not lose any refrigerant, though, because we're just going to remove those 4 bolts from the bracket so we can lift it up. I already broke the torque. Kind of got caught in our cap there. All right, so the idea here is, without putting any tension on these hoses, and we're going to have to kind of get rid of our wire support here, we're going to want to lift up on the compressor. Make sure we got all these out. Set these aside. Right, so yeah, you don't want to lift up on the lines. And this particular type of compressor, this is like a Harrison HT6. It's 2-piece, so you don't want to get any torsion or flex on it, or it'll start leaking. That's just kind of like what they do. But we can pick it up like this. I feel like we can bunge it out of the way. We're going to need to pull this nut here, which we're going to have to do anyway because we have to take this resonator off and pull the stud off, which is holding these 2 lines. And that'll let us pick the compressor up enough to get this intake out of here finally. All right. We'll put the nut back on the stud. We'll bag this for later. So now this whole thing is free. We'll figure out how we're going to get it positioned up and out of the way, and then we'll come back and pull this intake out. All right, guys, I'm just going to hold it up out of the way for a little bit. See if I can maneuver this thing out of here. Finally. There we go. Set this back down where it was. This secure so it doesn't roll off. Sure we're not pinching the harness. All right. Now what we need to do is we need to plug up these holes in these ports before any crap falls into them, get these old gaskets out of here. All right, this is what it looks like inside, and then here finally are the hard lines coming out of the fuel injection pump going to each of the injectors. So now we've got easy access to remove those without bending the lines. It's really important not to bend the lines when you're removing that, whether you're just going to change the injector or whether you're changing the pump. Either way, you want to keep those lines nice and straight. They're all pre-bent by the factory for certain angles. All right, so now we still have some more stuff to take off on the passenger side. So what we're going to start doing now is we're going to get the air box off, and we're going to get this ducting off. This ducting is pretty simple. There's some band clamps on either end of this. So we're just going to take a flathead screwdriver and release the band clamp here. And we're going to release the one at the turbo. This resonator has got a crimp clamp on it, so you can't take that off. And we already took the nut that holds it over here because we had to get that stud out so that we could have moved the air compressor, excuse me, the AC compressor, so we could have got the lower intake out in the first place. And then we've got this kind of elbow here that's super leaky with oil. This will be a chance to try and investigate what's going on with that too. See if we can take the lower clamp off first. Eventually we'll need to get all of it out, but we'll start with this. Actually, I don't think that clamp even is even letting go. We're actually pulling the whole fitting piece out. All right, let's try this end. There, that off. We'll figure that piece out later. Now with that clamp off, we got this. And then we should be able to get this off and out of here. So now that piece is off. Now to get the air box off, there's two 13mm bolts that come up from the fender well. We'll open this up, and be careful with these. Sometimes the plastic's gone and these little stainless clasps can just drop out on you. This one's still in good condition. Just going to open this up. Looks like it's time for a new air filter too. Take this out, and then we can see where that 13mm is popping up there. We'll go ahead and PB blaster that down, and then I'll show you guys on the other side. We'll pull this out. That'll allow us to remove this box. All right, so this is that 13mm bolt that's holding the airbox on, and there's the alignment tab. Come up here with a breaker bar so we can crack the torque on this rusty guy. There he went. I don't know, it might be too much rust for the electric ratchet. Let's give it a shot. Alright guys, this is what that bolt looks like that we took off from the bottom. Now the box is held onto this kind of bracket that's sitting into the fender by this little Christmas tree clip, and then the fender piece is got some kind of springy prongs on either side. See if we can raise the camera up and get our hands in here to give it a squeeze. There we go. These two prongs here are what you're trying to get to let go of the fender. And now the box is out of the way. I can see there's some more rodent activity up here that we need to vacuum out. All right, next thing we're going to take off is this upper control arm dust shield to give us access to come in to where the injector lines are. So if yours is missing, I'll put a link in the video description for the part number for this, but there's just some Christmas tree clips. We just want to gently prise these out. Two more. One more. You want to get it out without tearing it or breaking anything. There we go. Set this out of the way. Now with this guy cleared out of the way here, you can actually see all your glow plugs nice and easy here. All right. All right, the passenger side is the most cramped, but we can see right here for the number 2 cylinder, there's one of the injectors, right? And there's the 19mm fitting that holds the hard line onto the fuel injector. This is one of the return hoses, and this is the other return hose right here. So this piece here, this exhaust shield, is blocking our access. Now, 15 years ago, if you back up the camera, I would say just remove the whole turbo. That was 15 years ago, and there's a lot more corrosion on these trucks now. and there's a lot more chance to break something, and almost everything's discontinued and the parts are unobtainium. You can't even find these 6.5s in the salvage yard very easily anymore. So I'm going to try to avoid that. I think what we're going to try and do is we're going to try and take that shield right here, this heat shield. That is held in by these two small, looks like maybe 7mm bolts. One there. Right in the back there. Get some light for you. Get in there. That guy in the very back corner. And then this guy right here. All right, so those two bolts go into a bracket that holds this heat shield. And then the bottom of that bracket, I don't know if you can see it from where you are, but if we come in from here, come in from up top here, this little brace that comes off the bottom of the bracket that I'm tapping on right here, that holds the bottom of this heat shield. It's like a foot that fits into it. So I'm hoping if we can just take those two 7s off, we can kind of cock this around and pull it out. And if we can do that, you can tell from the view you see of the number 2 injector, and we'll be able to have access to loosen up these lines. So let's give that a shot. If we bomb out, then we'll have to roll the dice on removing the turbo, and hopefully nothing breaks. All right, guys, we're going to go in here and go after these 7mm on the heat shield now. I'm going to have to block your view to get at them. This guy we should be able to get just with a straight 7mm. At least I think it's a 7mm. Yeah. All right. Now we'll switch to ratchet wrench from our breaker bar. Let's see if we can get it off. I was worried about these breaking. I just was hoping that the heat shield doesn't get as hot as the turbo itself. Yeah, this guy's coming out just fine. I'm not going to take him all the way out because I'm afraid I'll drop him. Now this one I can't get a straight shot at for the angle. Probably have to come in here with a wobble. And then we'll be able to see if we can manipulate the shield. If we just pan the camera back over here, I'll show you guys, the concern I have with trying to remove this. If we take a look at the downpipe here, the turbo, you can see these bolts are just rust welded together. And I'm just concerned if we try to take the turbo off, those bolts are going to shear off. And then we're going to have a bigger job than we already have. So that's where we're going to go this route first. All right, guys, the access for this one, I come in here with a 1/4-inch ratchet with a small 7mm socket on the end. And there's just enough room to slide it in from the front here. So you can see I got my hand right under the turbo, and I'm just reaching in and getting that fastener off. You don't have a lot of clearance in terms of arc to swing, so it's going to take a little while to work it off, but it does work, and it does have the right access so that you can get a good bite on this. This little bolt has a very shallow head, and you just can't get a grip on it with a wobbly, so this is the only way I believe she's going to come off with what we're going to try here. Now, we've already been burned once trying to take a shortcut with the upper radiator hose, but we'll try again here and see how we luck out. All right, guys, we're going to have to pull that turbo. The service manual is not going to be much help to us. They don't really give you a whole lot of information. They tell you to remove the CDR valve and vent hose. They tell you to remove the grommet from the rocker. You probably can leave that on there. They tell you to pull the feed hose off. You really just need to disconnect it from on top. And then they tell you to remove the upper return pipe retaining bolts. There's a couple of 10mm on here that hold this pipe that runs down the side. They tell you to remove the assembly retaining nuts. There's 4 nuts on 4 studs they want you to remove. These are the ones that are really rusty while we were trying to avoid doing this. And then you'll be able to remove this. What they don't tell you is there's a band clamp here in the back that has to come off as well. A vacuum line on this wastegate actuator that's got to be disconnected. And then there's a 10mm bolt that's holding this number 3 part that you can't see in the picture has got a bracket way over here. And they're not telling you they also have to disconnect that as well. So there's a little bit more than they go over, but let's go ahead and get into it. All right, that shield isn't coming out, guys, so we're going to have to go ahead and go for the turbo here. There's 4 studs that hold it to the top of the exhaust manifold, and then there's nuts on the bottom. You can see right there. And I've already doused them with the chemicals. This is my go-to chemical for these kind of problems, AC Delco exhaust rust penetrant. This works pretty good on manifold bolts and that sort of thing. We'll give it a shot on this problem. We also have this band clamp back here, and we've given it a shot on this as well. That's an 11 millimeter nut that holds the band clamp. These 4 nuts on these studs are 15s. There's 2 10 millimeters. You can see the top of it right here. These are bolts that hold the turbo oil drain, and then it's a 19 millimeter fitting on the oil inlet. So we got to take all of that off, plus this vacuum hose. So we're going to go after the hard part first, which would be the 15 millimeter rusty nuts. Now something else with these is just the shape of this cast iron fitting down here. You can't get a 1/2 inch impact socket to fit. So we're going to have to go 3/8, but I don't think there's going to be enough oomph on that if we have to go that route. So we're using going to use a neck down and a swivel to get it to 1/2. But what I'm going to try first is to do it manually, just to try to avoid shearing off the stud from corrosion, if that's going to be a problem. So I'll show you the first one. Hopefully it goes all right. I'm just going to come in from the bottom here. That's why we took that cover off, so we can do things like this. Get this on here, and then we'll see if we can get this to release just with that. Now be careful of this air conditioning line. I want to get this position where I'm not putting any stress on that on my first pull. And we'll see if we can get this guy to let up. I'm using a 1/2 inch breaker bar here. Yeah, no, that ain't happening. All right. Next thing we're going to try is some heat. I really don't want to use an impact wrench, so we're going to try to heat up the nut, and then we'll try this again. All right, you can use an acetylene torch or MAP gas with propane, or excuse me, with oxygen, or you could use a bolt buster. And I'm going to use a bolt buster. It's all electric. Just uses induction to heat things up. Going to heat this guy up. We've got our socket set up right here so we can get it on there as quickly as we can. So it heats it up pretty quick. We don't need to cherry it. Just want to try to open up a gap. Got these fumes coming off from the rust inhibitor that we sprayed on there, or the lubricant. All right, let's try that. I'm switching to a ratchet so I get some more flexibility on the angle. There we go. All right, I guess we will be able to get these off without busting them up. That's the technique that we'll use on all 4. A little bit of heat with the induction heater, and then just a really long breaker bar, 1/2 inch. All right, I'll leave that guy on there till he cools. We'll go do the other 3, and then we'll come back. All right, with those 15 millimeter nuts out of the way, we can turn our attention to this 11 millimeter rusty nut on this downpipe clamp. So here, hopefully the chemical action is sufficient, and it looks like it is. Okay, yep, looks like it's going to work its way off. Might have to go back and forth to cut through all these rust threads. At some point, I can hopefully get this little stubby ratchet in here. Not yet, though. All right, so I'm just going to work this off, and we'll take this guy off, and then we'll come back. I'm going to go ahead. There's no reason to show these two 10s over here. There's nothing to that. There's two 10 millimeters here, one on this side and one on the other side for the drain. We'll come back and do the 19 on top. All right, guys, the AC Delco chemical did a great job on the band clamp. So we've got that loosened up. And we're going to bring our attention up here on top. Just get this vacuum line off, hopefully without tearing or breaking it. For the wastegate actuator. And then we're going to pop a fitting like this, 19 millimeter. It's very similar to an oxygen sensor tool. And hopefully we'll be able to crack the torque on this guy. There we go. Well, nope. I'm going to have to get a wrench underneath as well so that the bottom fitting doesn't turn. All right, this fitting is a 16 millimeter. We'll put our 19 adapter back on and let's see if we can get it off this time. There we go. All right, there's that. All right, so I think the only thing we've got left is we did have one more 10 millimeter for the drain on the other side. I'm going to go get that, and then we should be able to lift this off. All right, after that other 10 on the drain pipe, there's a 10 right here that's holding the CDR valve for the crankcase ventilation. We're going to take that out, and then we're going to pull this guy out of the grommet that's on the valve cover. He just wiggles out like that, just like that. Now to get this to separate down here, at least in our case, to get the turbo to separate from the exhaust manifold, came in down through our opening with a brass punch on this edge. You want to use brass here so you don't dent up any of the steel. And then for some extra persuasion, because this one particular corner was kind of stuck, came in with the brass hammer right on the stud. And the brass won't dent or damage steel because it's softer. That gives you the shock that you need to get it to separate. At this point, right, she's ready to come off. So we're going to work her off this band clamp in the back. We're going to have to fiddle that. It's loose, but we're going to have to fiddle it out of the way with a pry bar. You guys can see right back here, you know, we're clear on the back, but it's kind of cocked and still holding the downpipe in the front here. So I got to get a pry bar in there and get that fitting out of the way, and this guy's coming off. All right, we got that clamp out of the way, I think, and now, unless something else surprises us, we can get this turbo out of here. There we go. All right, so let me find a home for this, and then we'll go after that heat shield. All right, there's only one gasket on this whole shebang. It's up here on the oil drain tube. This is just machined to fit. So what we'll have to do is be very careful cleaning up the corrosion so that we maintain that machine fitment. See if we can get this clamp off out of here because it's putting pressure on this shield that we want to get off. It's like everything is like super cramped on the Suburban. All right, so there's the clamp. The bolt that fell out of it just goes through here. It's made of stainless steel, so it's not rusty, but we're going to need a new nut to go on it for sure. All right, so remember that foot we were talking about. So this guy should like come up off that foot like that on that side. See if we can get this side to let go. Well, that side came off. This side is jammed up. I don't want to bend it. But now I'm seeing why we weren't not able to get it off with the turbo on there. We're having trouble getting it off even with the turbo out of the way. But this is the last step we've got, and then we can get access to these fuel lines. So let me fiddle with this and come back and show you what we ended up doing to get this off of here. All right, guys, we're just trying to get the shield off of this little foot that I showed earlier. Some corrosion is holding it on. We gave it some penetrating fluid, and there's a little spot right here on the shelf of the bracket and where it slots into this stainless steel shield. Right, you see we can move it up. So what we're going to try and keep doing is working this back and forth. It's probably going to take a bit, but eventually, I think we're going to be able to get it to let go, and you have to get it to come out evenly. I don't think we can catch it on camera here because we're going to fiddle with it for a little bit longer, but that's the only thing that's holding it on is that little foot. It's kind of like friction fit, and it's just over time, over the decades, it's gotten to where it won't let it go. So let me keep fiddling with that a bit, and we'll bring you back when we get it off. All right, guys, I've been fiddling with this for a while, and I think she's finally going to work out. It's just a really, really tight friction fit on that foot. And there she is. As you can see where I had to really, really work that off. But that little foot that you see right there, that little pointy foot, slides up here and into this slot. And it's just a really, really tight fit. There's nothing holding it over here. It's just right there. Now there's another foot on this side, right at the very end. So technically, that's technically holding it, but that one I had no trouble with. That slid right out. And that one sits in over here. So that's all that is. We got it out without any damage at all to this guy. And at this point, we can finally see, here's all these injectors, right? There's number 2, there's number 4, there's number 6, and there's number 8, way in the back there. So he's still going to be cramped with these hoses, which at the end of the day, right, they said you needed to remove these hoses, and maybe that's why they said you needed to remove them in the manual, because that's the only way to get number 8. But we'll be able to get to 7 of them and loosen them up, no problem right now. The driver's side, of course, doesn't have any of these kind of obstructions. All right, so at this point, I'm going to PB blast all these 19mm line fittings down, both on the injectors and on the pump. We'll let that sit, we'll grab some lunch, and then we'll come back and work these off. All right, guys, we've let the PB blaster soak in. It's time to go and loosen all of these 19mm fittings at the top of the nozzles. They're coming in to retain the hard lines. I'm going to be using 2 different kinds of tools for this. This first one, when you got a clear shot, is the same one we used on the oil feed line to the turbocharger. All right, so this guy's going to look like I'm just trying to get it to where it's going to fit with the hose line, with the cutout. All right. And we're just going to take a 1/2-inch breaker bar and we're going to break the torque on this guy. That's it. All right, so that's one type rather. All right, so we got the torque broke on that one with that type. The other type we'll use when you got obstructions like this one. So this is the number 2. This number 4 cylinder one will come in with this type of crowfoot type flare end. So this is not a regular crowfoot, right? So it's got more sides on it to not slip. Put something like this on like that. You might have to use a swivel here because this one particular one here, we've got this riser on the exhaust manifold that's in our way. So I'm going to get it on the fitting first. Get on there. All right. And then I want to see what can I use to get on there. Can I get on just from the side? No. So I'm going to have to put a swivel on there to clear this. We should be able to get all of these loosened up between these two tools. All right, now let's just pop the torque on this guy. There we go. All right, so I'm going to go around and do all 8 of these like that. No reason for me to show you all of them. Between these two tools, we'll be able to do all of them on both sides. So I'm going to do the 4 over here and the 4 on the driver's side, and then we'll come back. All right, guys, last one on the driver's side, just to give you a view from this side. We got the number 1 injector we're about to do. Get the tool on here with you guys in the way. That's it. Just break the torque. Remove the tool. A stubby 19 is a good tool for this. For some reason mine disappeared on me, so I'm having to make do with this adjustable wrench. If you come in the camera from the top, right, we're just loosening this fitting up. That's all we're doing. Some of these are kind of rusty and they're on there really tight. So we're going to have to inspect these lines too. That's it. Once you get it to where you can turn it off by hand, and it's loose, you're done. All right, so now we've got all these injector lines done. Now let's go to the pump. All right, so now in the pump, same deal. We're going to take the same 2 tools, depending on the line we're working on, and we're going to start cracking the torque on these. Now these shouldn't be anywhere near as tight as the ones on the injectors because they're not exposed to road elements, so they're not going to have corrosion. But try to be gentle on them, because if for some reason the pump, if you got your fasteners loose, you could knock it out of time. So what I try to do on this is we zoom out a little bit. You know, I just take the tool. Now because this line here, I might not be able to get this tool in here. Let me switch to a different tool. Naturally, right when I go to show you something, there's a problem. But that's why you have to have a bunch of different tools. Switch this 3/8 breaker bar. Just kind of give it a hit like that. Work it loose that way. Of course, now it's wedged on there. It's not going to give me my tool back. Give me that tool back. Come on, baby. There we go. All right, so we're going to go around, loosen all these up so that we can spin them by hand, just like that. And then we'll come back and we'll take the retainers off and get the lines out of the way. All right, guys, you're not going to be able to get all of the injection pump fittings loosened up till you start getting some of these lines out of the way, but we get a few pairs that we can get out of the way. They're held in and retained by these 7mm bolts that you see right here. So we're just going to take that one off on this 1-3 combination set. And again, these are like the little 7s that were on the heat shield by the turbo. They have a very shallow head on them. So you're going to need a 6-point socket to grab onto them, 7mm. Once that's out of the way, if you got everything loosened up, then this line can finally be freed off. There's going to be some fuel that comes out. We're going to need to get a trim tool to get this clip off of here, and then we can pull these 2 lines out. All right, guys, as we take these off, we're just going to put a temporary little numbering on them. This is for nozzle cylinder 1, this is for nozzle cylinder 3. Just tape off the ends until we can put some rubber tubing on the ends. I did want to show you here, you don't really have to try and prise this guy off because you might break. It's a lot easier just to come in here with a pry tool or a small screwdriver. Just kind of lift up on it, and that'll open up this harness connector. So this is what we're going to continue doing, is removing each pair that we can to get more access to take the next fitting off so that we can get all of them off the injection pump. All right, just to check in, guys, we've got all the lines off the injection pump. We've got all the lines out where we can inspect and clean them separately. You'll notice I put a little zip tie. You could also put a paint mark on where the number 1 line goes, just to help you with the clocking and the reference and reinstalling the lines when you're done. But at this point, everything's cleared out of the way, and we don't have any more connections that we have to worry about that are going to the injection pump. All right, folks, all that work, and we're finally ready to swap out these injectors. So if we zoom in a little bit, you can see what we said at the very beginning, right? We got a return rubber hose coming from the hard return line to the injector. It's got a nipple here, and then it goes out from the other one to the next one, and they're all daisy chained together. And then this one to this one, and then this one to that one, and then the very last one, the last nozzle has a cap on it. If we zoom in close here, this is the easiest one to see, so I'm not going to show all of these. If we zoom in here at the very tip where my pliers are, there's a little tiny hose clamp, right there. That's assuming it hasn't rusted off on you. But we want to work that off on both ends. There will be one down here too. This one's kind of got crud all over it, but you guys can see right there. Just want to work these off the nipple like that. So we're going to work that off the nipple on both ends of each of these hoses. And then after you get it off the nipple, just like with a radiator or a vacuum hose, you're going to give it a twist to break the adhesion. And then you're going to pull it off, just like that. So we're going to go through on both sides and pull all of these lines off because we can't get the socket on the nozzle until we remove these lines. If you kind of zoom in here, you can see maybe real close what I got here, right? So there's the little clip. And then if we get this out of the way with the light, there's the nozzle that we pulled it off of. And there's one on this side. So each one has a pair of these nozzles. You could probably leave the cap on the last one. I'm going to go pull it off, but if you find it's really cramped for you, because as you tighten these down, the orientation of these might not look the way they do. Every truck will end up being a little different. It's just wherever the torque landed on the nozzle. Sometimes it could be opposite. Sometimes they could be straight up and down. It just depends on where they landed. But anyway, you're going to pull all these hoses off on both lines, and then we'll pull the nozzles. All right, we got those return lines off. In some cases, like if we look at this guy over here, the very end of the line broke off on the nozzle. Same thing happened over here. That's just how rotted these lines are. There's a little bit of it on the back of that one too. Maybe it's too much glare. There it is. So that's not going to get in the way of our tool. So I'm going to pull this one off, and then we'll take a closer look at the tool. Very similar to what I showed you on the pulling off the lines. You're going to need a variety of different extensions and maybe even a swivel, depending on what you end up doing for number 8. And by the way, when I did the lines for number 7, it's easier to access it from below with a 19 millimeter flare wrench than it is to come in from the top with those special tools I showed you. All right, so now we're going to see if the anti-seize from 26 years ago is holding up. Not the healthiest sound, but it's coming out. I'm using a 1/2-inch flex head ratchet rather than a breaker bar in this particular case. All right, so there's our number 2 injector. And I'll show you how this tool works. All right, so these mechanical injectors, now these are the original ones from 1999. I'm hoping we'll be able to see the manufacturer mark. Yeah, right there. These should be Bosch. Yeah, Bosch. So GM's OEM supplier back when these engines were brand new was Bosch. So these are the original Bosch injectors. All right, so the deal with this special socket, the one I'm using is a snap-on S6128, but there's a couple of different ones. There's one from OTC. There's a couple other ones. I'll put links in the description. What's important about these types of sockets is they don't damage these nozzles. These nozzles are pressed in, and if you get a regular socket on here and they bend, then they'll end up opening up here and you'll have fuel leaking out. And that's the deal with this. So it's a nice tight fit, six-sided, and you'll notice that it's got like rounded corners, and that's because the base shell of this injector, if you zoom in here and look at it, is not squared off like a regular socket would be. So that's to deal with this. Now the other thing you want to make sure that comes out is there's this copper crush washer right here. Make sure that came out of the cylinder with it. Now we're going to go do the other 7 the same way. All right, guys, we got all 8 of these old injectors off, and we got all 8 of the return lines off, as well as the 2 little plugs that go on the number 8 and the number 7 cylinder injectors. You can see that some came off intact with the clips on the ends. The end broke off. This one, the clip came off just fine, but you know, dry rot has got some of these hoses. These are all the original hoses on this 99, so these are all 26 years old. No surprise that these are breaking like that. Some of these clips had gotten sunk into the rubber, and we couldn't pull them back, so we just had to twist them off. Again, due to age, that's not too surprising, right? Situations like this, but all the clips were there except this clip just disintegrated. I don't know why all the others didn't rust. We had a few that got some kind of rusty tarnish on them, but this one just kind of fell apart. I don't know what happened with that. So what are we replacing all this with? Well, we're going to, if I showed you before that these are OEM from Bosch, if we zoom in here, right? So this is Bosch, but these are made in Germany. So back in 99, these came from Germany. There's the part number on the side there, and then 973 is probably what the Bosch number was at the time. We're going to replace them with AC Delco OENOS. These are new old stock parts. These are discontinued, but it's AC Delco 217-1404 or a GM 1245-8122. You can still come across these. And the way these should come is they should be sealed in a bag because they're very sensitive to debris. So this one is sealed in a bag, and then it's wrapped in a kind of anti-corrosion paper to keep it from rusting. And then also in the box will be a new copper crush washer. So that's what you should get in the box. You should not have it loose in the box. Now I have seen them where they're not sealed in a bag like this, and they've got like a plastic cap on both ends. That's okay too, because sometimes they're shipped like that. The only problem is these are going to be made in India. Even though these are probably 10 years old. I mean, Bosch moved the stuff to India very early on. So we can only hope it's as good as the German ones. It's certainly going to be better than any of the Chinese stuff and any of the aftermarket stuff. So I recommend you always stick with NOS GM or genuine Bosch injectors for this 6.5 engine. The other, and we've got 8 of these. The other thing we're going to be using, we got some 1406, 6301 GM. You only need 2, but you have to buy a bag of 10. So there's the 2 rubber end caps that we'll use on the end pieces. Just in case we lose one or we happen to go through the box and we find that we're missing one, we've got some 1402, 5557. That's the part number for the copper crush washer for this particular injector. We've also got a bunch of these 1233 8007, which are these new clips. So they're all nice and brand new, so they won't be falling apart on us. And then we've also got a set of 8 new hoses, 1406, 6305. You can tell the GM ones because they're going to have either a blue or yellow or white stripe running down them. There's some writing on them too, but that'll give us fresh new hoses. And then I mentioned in the service manual that you're going to use an anti-seize on these. This is a nickel-based anti-seize from AC Delco. It's a 104039 or a GM 1237 1386. Do not use the copper type, use the nickel type. And that is pretty much it. We're just going to reverse what we did. I'm going to install all these injectors first, and we're going to torque them down to the specification we saw in the service manual. I'm going to do 7 of them. I'll show you just one. There is a technique to using some of the anti-seize to hold the copper washer onto the injector so it doesn't fall off. It's kind of like a little dab of grease that you can do. I'll show you that. And then how much to use. You don't use much of the anti-seize at all, because otherwise it'll interfere with getting the proper torque. The torque value in the service manual already anticipates using some of this because it's called for. All right, so I'm going to do 7, and we'll come back on the last one. I'll show you that, and then I'm going to do several of the return lines, but I will show you there is a kind of like a technique for getting these on. This is the old one, but what I'll do is I'll put the clamp on, we'll dip it in diesel fuel, and then we'll push the whole thing onto the nipple from behind like that. The clamp will open up and then grab it where it needs to grab it. I'll show you that technique. It makes it a little bit easier. These are kind of fragile. You can see sometimes they would just get warped out. We tried to give them a pull. I mean, this wasn't like grasping and beating the heck out of it. We gave it a pinch, and then we tried to pull it, and the pliers grabbed onto one and separated it. That happened to a couple of them, like these two here, and I think this one over here. All right, let's get to it. We're almost done. I mean, this video is going to be like an hour and a half long. It's probably only 15 or 20 minutes, the actual repair work. All of this was leading up to getting to this point. And one other thing I'll show you is if you take a look at these, we can see some marks where fuel was dripping off these old injectors. You can see the soot. You can see the drizzle marks on these. So these were long overdue for being serviced. Not just the fact that they're all worn internally. I mean, they can be rebuilt, but the outer housing's very deeply corroded. There's a lot of pitting on the housing. All right, guys, I just opened up one of these. Before I start putting these in, I figured I'd show you one of them inside the wrapping. And again, the copper washers in the box. Well, this is what the injector looks like. So it's got like a protective cap on top. And we can see these, similar to the other one I showed you that was used, Bosch, but this one says India. It's got a different part number on this section here, but then it has the 973, which is the common number that we're interested in for this particular application. All right, so these are not rebuilt. These are brand new. Anyway, I just want to show you that before I start putting these on. Again, when I'll go do 7 of them, and I'll come back on the last one. I'll show you the anti-seize technique and torquing. All right, guys, we're on the passenger side here. Just about to do the last injector. There's number 8 right there. There's number 6, number 4, and we're going to do number 2 together just to show you that technique. And I'll show you what we got on the driver's side. So we're going to pull our little dirt plug out of there. Open up our last injector box. Well, there went our washer, but fortunately it landed conveniently right on top. All right. And we're going to take our anti-seize compound. You don't want to goober this up heavily. So we just want to get it on these threads here. That's the only place we want it, just on the threads. And then we're going to make sure we get it into the threads. So that we see uniform coverage on all the threads. Now, whatever we've got excess, we're going to make a little dab in this corner and a little dab in that corner. And then we're going to have 2 rags. You don't need to see that, but off camera I've got 2 rags. One's for wiping off this anti-seize, and the other one is for grease and other things. We're going to put our copper washer on there, the crush washer, and so now that's going to hold it in place. Take our cover off, and we're going to thread it in by hand. Because we don't want to cross-thread anything. We'll wind her down until she's starting to get tight. Then we're going to take our special socket, And on the special socket, you want to make sure that you clean it out with brake clean or something from where you were taking off the old ones, because you don't want any crud in there, because right now the openings are all exposed. And then we're going to torque it to 50 foot-pounds. And once we got it torqued, we're going to put our cover back on it, and we're ready to do the injector lines. Let me go show you what the driver's side looks like, and then we'll get started on the, I should say, the return lines, and we'll get started on the return lines. All right, just a shot of the driver's side. 1, 3, 5, and way back in the corner, number 7. So again, on this side too, we're all ready for the return lines. All right, guys, so what's the technique for getting these return hoses onto these nipples of the nozzle? Well, I'm going to show you on the old one first, right? So there's the approximate location. This is the factory location of these original clamps, right near the base. And what we're going to do is we're going to lube up the nipple and the hose with some diesel fuel. We're going to grab a flat kind of pliers. This one has no teeth, so it won't tear up the rubber. We're going to grip the hose right behind the clamp, and we're going to push it on. And because of the way we're doing it, the clamp is going to get forced to open and go around the nipple. It's that easy. That's all it takes to put this on. Now, these original hoses came in different lengths. You can still see the blue stripe I was telling you about earlier on the one side here. You'll see on the new ones. The Suburban and the Tahoe, it's 6.5 inches. We're going to cut these to 7, but when you see it, the new ones are longer because for different applications. But for our application, we're going to cut each of these to 7 inches. All right, guys, I'm just wrapping up these injector return lines, these nozzle return lines on the passenger side. I said I'd show a couple of them to you, the technique to get them on here. A must-have tool really is an inspection mirror. We can take a look in the back here. If we can get the light just right. There we go. And you can use this to tell that you've got things seated properly. In this case, the end cap on the number 8 nozzle. We can see that we got that settled just right where we want it. All right, so let's do these ones up, this one set that's left in the front here. And as we do these, we keep covering them up. So we're going to open up our 6305 hose. And then in the earlier clip, I mentioned that the factory length on the Suburban was 6.5 inches, and that we were just going to stay close to that range. We're just going to go up to 7, just so we don't have excess. Other trucks may have different lengths. Just GM provides one hose for all, and you need to cut it to length. A nice pair of sharp scissors will give you a nice clean cut. And then you're going to come in, step over here to the battery. We're going to come over here and we're going to get our clamps. And what works good for these clamps is a pair of pliers that have teeth on them, so you can grab the grooves of the clamp like this, right? Get your finger here in case it decides to go airborne. And then just like the original ones, we're going to put it about that far from the edge. So we're going to run this one to the top, and so we'll run this one on the bottom. So we'll take orientation of where the clamp's going to be to make it easy to get at next time. And so if this guy's going to be facing on the bottom, and we're going to run this one to the top return, we'll put that clamp right here. Just like that. All right, so I'm going to take this other one and put him aside so he doesn't get lost. Now the next thing I'm going to do, and it doesn't matter how you get it in here, I just happen to put some clean diesel fuel in this little dropper bottle, but we're going to use the fuel as a lubricant. I'm going to get that down into the pipe, the hose. Then I'm also going to come over here and I'm going to get this on the nipples as well. Including this little guy that's up here in the dark that you can't see. I'll get some light on him in a little bit. So that'll help us lube these on. And then the old one that I showed you in the previous clip obviously is nice and worn, so it's a little bit harder to get the new ones on. A little bit harder. I got two kinds of these. I got the small green ones that I showed you earlier, and then I got these really long ones. This is a good one for this kind of position. I'm kind of doing it at an angle here so you guys can watch from where you are, but then I'm just going to wiggle it on. And you'll feel the clamp open up. You can make sure it's going on okay. We're not done yet. We're just trying to make sure it's going on straight. And because we don't have any teeth on these pliers, we don't have to worry about cutting the hose. We just got to get the clamp to go over the nipple. And we want it to sit all the way at the bottom. Want it to bottom out on the shell. Just a little bit more. And we cleaned up dirt and debris from around this area before we got started so that we don't have to worry about anything falling into the nozzle. All right, that one's good. Might try just a little bit more. Good. If we zoom in, right? Yeah, we got maybe a little bit more, maybe a millimeter more to push this down. I don't know if you guys can see the light's like necessary, but it's also creating some washout. But we'll catch that one later. You want to get the rubber fully seated. So let's go do this other one. Same deal. All right, so we're grabbing it behind the clamp so that the pliers are pushing against the clamp so that the clamp won't move on the rubber. Whoops. And we're waiting to feel it open up. And we can reposition this and wiggle it all the way on. Now the alternative is that you get in here and you try to open the clamp and then you try to push the hose down while you open the clamp. And it can be really awkward to do like that. And then I got to get some light over here. You guys can't see and I can't see. So let me reposition the camera so we can get some light on this return line, hard line nipple. All right, so we're in a good spot to do the last one. Before I scoot over there, since that last clip looked pretty washed out, if we zoom in here to the mirror, hopefully this time I can get the light. You can see how this one's seated on the shell and how this one's seated on the shell. Right there. All right. Now once we got that done, to keep debris out, I like using these little stick-on circles. They work good for covering up the nozzle. All right, so let's get the last guy, which is this return line, this return hard line right up here. Same deal. The only difference with this one is now this return line up here is going to move. So I might have to go get my smaller plier to do this. What I'm doing is I'll just put my finger behind here at great risk because this pipe wants to kind of move on me. So now I'm going to go grab that smaller green handle plier that you saw me have before. If I can find it. Naturally, whenever you need something, it goes for a walk. I can't find it. We'll just try to keep moving with what we got here. I would have preferred the smaller one for this particular situation, but we don't have it. So the clamp's opened up. I'm just trying to work it down. Oops. Yeah, that's what I was afraid of. This line wants to move. To get that pry back up out of there. I should have done that in the first place, guys. I was going to put a pry bar behind that line before I put this on. Let me go ahead and pull that up, and then we'll push this on the rest of the way. But we're basically done here. We just have to get this on, and we're ready to start the next step. All right, guys, if we zoom in here, just wanted you to show you that we've got this guy on all the way. And all that happened, I just took this little hook here, got him back in his little bracket. All right, there's just a little bracket. If we come up right here on top, you can see right where this hook is. This guy moves up inside this little bracket. If we get the camera right there and we get the light, it's always about the light. Right? So he sits inside this little bracket, and so there's going to be some play and some movement. So it didn't get bent or anything. It just moves around in there. All right, we're done now, and at this point we are ready to put the hard lines back in. All right, for the hard lines, the order we took them off was the pair for cylinders 1 and 3, and then the pair for cylinders 2 and 4, and then the pair for 6 and 8, and last 5 and 7. We took them off in this order so that we could get tools in on the injection pump side to fit in and release the torque on those fittings and get them off. You have to clear some of the lines out of the way for a tool to fit. To put them back, we're going to go in the opposite order. We're going to start with the 5-7. We've taken each set and we've cleaned them up. What you want to look at on these, I mean, we're not looking for show car quality here, right? There's going to be corrosion on this mount clamp. That's fine. What you don't want is corrosion on the line itself, because that would indicate that maybe it's going to have some perforation. We've got some surface corrosion on these end fittings. That's fine as well. We don't care about that. But we can go ahead and check all here on all of them to make sure that the actual lines are okay. So with this, we're going to go ahead and blow compressed air through them just in case any debris snuck in there. And then we're going to start reinstalling them in this order. Now this graphic here can be handy for where they go in the pump, noting that you marked where cylinder 1 is. Then you're going to have, for example, we're going to be doing 5 and 7. So we got 5 and 7, right? And then we can keep doing the pairs and have this as a reference for where they go. All right, we've got all the lines reinstalled on the injection pump and torqued down to 20 foot-pounds. Remember the order that you come in here. When you come to do number 2 here, just the way it loops, you'll need to have, number 2 and number 4, you'll need to have 6 and 8 loose in order to get this guy to loop around this piece. That's just probably the only tip I can give you about this. But 20 foot-pounds on all 8. All right, guys, we've got our lines in on the nozzles on the driver's side. Again, 20 foot-pounds on each of the 19 millimeter fittings at the end of the lines. This particular 7 millimeter screw that's holding the bracket for these two, for the 1 and 3, and then you can't see it off camera here, but like right on the edge for 5 and 7. There's no specific torque value in the service manual for this. Just snug it up good and tight. All right, same view on the passenger side, although we've got a lot more visibility. And again, these 7 millimeter retaining screws for these line mount brackets here and here. This is for the 2 and the 4, and this is for the 6 and the 8. There's no torque value, so snug that up with a nut driver, 7 millimeter. And again, the end fittings on the hard lines, just like at the injection pump, at each nozzle, these are also 20 foot-pounds. These 19 millimeters are 20 foot-pounds on all 4 on this side as well. So we're all done with the lines. Now we're ready to put the turbo back in. We've dressed up this fitting here. So there's no gasket on this. It's a machined surface. So you don't use anything abrasive. I used chemical and brass wire to clean this, brass wire brush. That's it. I don't want to take any material off and potentially introduce a leak. On the drain pipe for the turbo oil, we used a carbide scraper, since it's steel, to get off the old gasket material. And we're going to have a new gasket on here. I'll show you that part number in just a minute, but we're going to bring the turbo over here and we'll go over the part numbers for that. All right, guys, we got our heat shield back in. These two 7mm, again, no specified torque value, so just snug them up. Make sure they are snug, or you get a rattle here and you'll be pulling everything off to fix it. And don't strip them out because they're very small. The gasket is going to be a GM 1409 8654. This is the gasket that covers the oil drain. We're going to replace the 4 nuts that we had to heat off on the studs with 4 GM 1151 4597. So we're going to put 4 new nuts on these. Our studs were fine, but if you need those, I'll put the part number for the studs in the video description. I also decided to just go ahead and replace this band clamp because not only was the nut rusty, but so was the threads on the screw. 1161 1439 would be the part number for the new band clamp. We're going to get our turbo installed. I'll come back with the torque values. All right, folks, with the turbo back in, let's go over the torque values. We're going to go 43 foot-pounds on those 4 nuts that are 15mm on the studs to the exhaust manifold. And then for the turbo drain pipe, those two 10mm are going to be 19 foot-pounds. This 19mm oil inlet fitting up on top is 13 foot-pounds. After you get all this in place, you've got this V-clamp on the back. There's no specified torque value. Bring that into position with the same size gap as you originally found it. It's helpful to tap around the edges as you're tightening up that 11mm nut. 11mm stubby is super handy for that. And a 10mm stubby is super handy for this inboard 10mm on the drain. Finally, when you put the air box back in, that 19mm bolt that goes through the fender is 19 foot-pounds. This 10mm bolt that's securing this CDR pipe, no torque value specified, but don't over tighten it. You'll strip out the aluminum on this part of the turbo. Just good and tight, nice and snug. All right, we're getting ready to install the lower intake manifold. We've got our new gaskets installed. Those are going to be a GM 1253 1704. They got little nubs on the very ends, and you want to make sure you get it oriented so that they're in the correct position in covering the bolts. If I kind of tilt the camera back in the back here a little bit, you can see what I'm talking about. See, this piece in the back has got to go down to cover that bolt hole. Similarly, there's one on the other side. You can easily get it backwards. Make sure you got it in the right orientation. We'll go ahead and get the manifold set in here. Pay particular attention to this return line, right? So there's a tab you got to lift up on the back here. So if I can zoom in and get you a close view of that. Hopefully that's a little better. You got to get this tab here above the manifold and then the one at the front, and that's really the only thing you have to deal with. All right, guys, as we put these bolts back into the lower intake manifold, I mentioned earlier in the video that they're numbered in the order you should torque them, and you're going to torque them in the order they're numbered, the 31 foot-pounds, but 4 of them are special. 9, 11, 13, and 15 penetrate into the crankcase, and they're going to have to be sealed, just like a water pump bolt going into the water jacket. I'm going to be using this GM product here, 1234 6004. To do that, we're just going to take the lower portion, this particular one I'm almost out of here. We're just going to spread it on the threads, just like a water pump bolt. Just want to make sure we see it on all the threads. You don't need to goober it up. You just need to make sure you cover all the grooves. And now we're ready to install these 4 that are special. And then we can go torque them in the order they're specified. All right, just a little bit more progress. All these 15mm nuts on all the brackets go to 31 foot-pounds also. Same on the ones that are securing the battery grounds and the grounds over here on the back firewall side of the passenger side. These clamps that hold the air box on here and here, this is 45 inch-pounds. This one doesn't specify, but I would run it about the same or snug. You don't want to over-tighten the plastic. 15 inch-pounds on the smaller clamps that go to this little accordion elbow here. When we get ready to put the upper intake manifold on, these 610 millimeters are going to go to 17 foot-pounds. Don't forget to re-RTV your seal here before you install that piece. You're going to need a new gasket if you have an EGR type. If you have a turbo type, it depends on the condition. This is the part number for the turbo type, 1013-7537. We're going to go ahead and put a new one on here because the other one's been there for quite some time. And then I'll go ahead and RTV this up. And the last torque value I'll give you is for this band clamp here. And we'll go ahead and hook the battery back up and get ready to start it. All right, guys, this is actually 50 inch-pounds. I missed it in the manual the first time. So 45 inch-pounds here, 50 inch-pounds on the one where the ducting goes to the turbo, and then also 50 inch-pounds on the band clamp after you put the RTV sealant on here. This brace here, these two 13s are 19 foot-pounds. This longer brace that you can't really see that goes to the turbo down to one of the intake manifold bolts, up here at the top, this bolt here is a 15 millimeter. It's 37 foot-pounds. And then, interestingly, the 15 millimeter nut on the end is 30 foot-pounds instead of 31 like all the others. But, you know, what's 1 foot-pound in the grand scheme of things? At this point, we've got everything done here. We're going to get ready to let the thread locker and the Teflon sealer on the bolts set up before we try to start it. We're going to let that sit for about an hour. We're going to go ahead and hook the battery back up, but other than that, we're ready to go. We're going to leave the cover off because we may have to adjust the timing one way or the other when we get to the final step after we start it, and we're going to use a Tech 2 scan tool for that. And the only other thing I'll show you is the material that I use to seal this hose here is this guy here from Permatex, black adhesive sealant silicone RTV. There's really not a GM product that's made anymore for that, and this works great. All right, guys, you're going to want to put a new fuel filter in as well. I'm going to use an AC Delco TP1256 or GM 1015-4635. We've already put it in the fuel filter manager, and we're going to bleed the air out. This will also help bleed some of the air out for this outlet pipes that are coming from the fuel filter manager over into the injection pump. After you do that, and I'll link a video up here on the right that goes into this fuel filter change in more detail. I didn't want to spend any more time in this clip on it. You're going to make sure the batteries are fully charged because you're going to have to do a long crank to purge the air out of these lines. You might want to try cracking the hard lines at some of the different injectors, the 19 millimeter fittings that are down below. I don't know if we can see them in this view. Pretty obstructed though, but you know what I'm talking about, and that will help you get that air out of the pump and out of the lines faster so you can get a start. All right, with the upper intake manifold onto the lower intake, the last thing is this engine cover. 4 10 millimeter bolts. They're torqued down to 100 inch-pounds. At this point, we can go inside, give it a start, and test the fuel injection balance. All right, guys, the last thing I'm going to show you is we're going to go into this Tech 2 scan tool. I'm going to build out this truck. 6.5 liter. This one's a VIN code F. This one's four-wheel drive, so it's a K. 4L80E automatic. We're going to go into special functions, and we're going to go into fuel system, cylinder power balance. Parking brake is set. So what are we going to do with this? Well, we're going to be able now to select each injector nozzle 1 through 8 and disable it and re-enable it. And this is going to be how we test it. Each one is contributing. So right now, injector nozzle for cylinder 1 is selected, and we're going to pick the disable button. And before I do, note the RPM. So when I disable injector 1, our RPM drops down, the engine starts wobbling. We put it back up and everything's normal again. So this is what we're going to do. Each one of these, disable 2, wobbling, re-enabled, contributing, 3, disable, wobbling, re-enable, 4, disable, wobbling, re-enable, 5. Just going to do through all these the same way. That one's contributing. That one's contributing. That one's contributing, and finally 8. Great. So they're all contributing. So now we've done a quick test using the computer built into the powertrain control module, and this activation of this function through the scan tool, and we verified each individual injector can be turned on and off. Of course, this is a function of the injection pump in conjunction with the fuel solenoid driver. But now we know everything's working. And at that point, guys, this job is over. Let's go ahead and button it up. All right, everyone, that's it. Everything's testing out good. We're all done with this injector replacement. It's a big job, but it's something that needs to be done. Now, there's nothing in the service manual about a interval when these need to be replaced. This is one of those kind of things, you replace it when it fails or when it's starting to show signs of wear. And when you replace one, you replace all 8. That's the only thing really that you get guidance from the service manual. But the kind of things you can look for when you get a lot of mileage on these, you start getting black smoke with where it's not burning the fuel completely all the way. You start getting problems with fluttering idle, where your tachometer might occasionally flutter while you're going. You might get problems with hard starting. So all those kind of things can be indications of these being worn out. We were already in here to do an injection pump replacement, so I carved this out as a separate video because while we were in there, we did this too because of the mileage. Anyway, I hope this video helped you out. If you got comments or questions about what we did, go ahead and leave it below. I'll try to help. If this helped you do the job yourself, saved you some money, or just taught you something, pay it forward and hit that like button. I'd really appreciate it. And thanks for watching.